Yep. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our October swag meeting, our third meeting of this year. We have a busy agenda, so we'll go ahead and just start diving into the slides. Okay, great. So welcome to the swag. Why don't we go around and just do a round of introductions so everybody knows who's here. I'll start. Andrea Amico, Portsmouth resident and co-chair of the swag, and I'll pass it to you, Al.
Al Pratt, Water Resource Director for the City of Portsmouth and co-chair of the SWAG.
Mason Caceres, Assistant Water Resource Manager for the City of Portsmouth.
Mariah Habershaw, Water Quality Specialist too for City of Portsmouth.
Katrin Hellman, resident Portsmouth.
Genevieve Beckstead-Muskie, school board member.
Rich Blaylock, City Council Representative.
Vince Lombardi, City Council.
Dave Mears, State Representative. Bill McComb, Fire Chief.
All right, and then we'll just go to online, couple people.
I'm Laurel Shader. I'm a senior scientist at Silent Spring Institute.
Hey, Laurel.
And Stephanie Secord taking the minutes, Public Information Officer.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, so we need to approve our minutes from our meeting in June. So I had shared those with everyone via email and didn't receive any feedback, so we just need to vote on those. If there is a motion to approve the June swag minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of Wednesday, June 8th of the SWAG.
Second.
Okay, great. Is everybody in favor of approving those minutes?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Do we have anyone opposed to approving those minutes? Okay, then those minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Just one other order of business I just wanted to mention. I think you all may have received an email, but our SWAG member, Jim Hewitt, submitted his resignation. So he will no longer be on the SWAG, and we just want to thank him for his service and his time with us. And with that, I think we can go ahead and move into our second agenda item, which is a quarterly update from Al.
Agenda, yeah, we have a lot to talk about tonight. A lot of presentations, so we'll try to keep things moving here. So water supply update, as I'm sure you're all aware, we are in a drought still. It's widespread. You see way out west, there's droughts, and all of the East Coast into New England, we are in drought. And here in New Hampshire, this is what the drought, US Monitor drought map looked like last week. I did find out, I was concerned with the federal shutdown that they might not be able to continue doing this, but the website does say that they're going to continue every week updating the flood maps, the drought maps, so it's a good thing. Right now, about 50% of the state is in severe drought, and that includes us, even though we're close to that moderate drought area south of us. About 33% of the state is in extreme drought. There was a call last week with the state drought management team, which is a group of 30 stakeholders. It's led by New Hampshire DES, and there are groups from across the state that are involved in that, from the Division of Forests and Lands, Agriculture, Water Supply, and others. And state climatologists did a great presentation of the state of things right now, and those meetings will continue. And you might have been involved in that. Were you on that call?
I was not.
Okay. So, you know, I'll get into some of the details of our drought as I go through some of our slides, but the central part of the state is certainly in tough shape right now. Here is a chart of our precipitation over the past year. Are the bars on the right, the red bars, as you note, and the blue lines are the 25-year monthly averages. And you see in April and May, thankfully, we had some good rains that got us out of the drought that we were in last December, January timeframe, and set us off pretty well for the summer. Through June, we were able to reap the benefits of that spring rain. And our water levels in the reservoir maintained until July 1st, just like they normally do. So we felt we were in good shape. But then July, August, and September, we were much below normal. I believe we were about 52% below normal for that period of time in our precipitation. And here is a chart of for the past 27 years or so. This is the 12-month rolling average of precipitation. And if you look way back, all the way back to 1998, we are at the lowest 12-month precipitation level right now. Actually, no, we were at that back in May, right before the storms, March, right before the storms. But we're still hanging out down in the very low regions of our historic low precipitation levels. And we can see that at the reservoir and how the reservoir reacts to all these droughts. See, this goes back to 2015, but we have the period of droughts here, 2016, 2020, 2022, 2024, and again, this year. Out of the past 10 years, 5 of those years have been drought years. So it makes you wonder what's normal now. It seems like a drought can be expected any and every year now, to a certain extent. This year, the drought followed a similar pattern as it did in 2022 and 2024, in that it was sort of late setting up. It started hitting us mostly in August and September. And here we are in October. We are similar levels that we were in 2022 and 2024. And if you go back to each of these years, the low point occurred right in the middle of October. You know, the weather shifts in October, plant uptake stops, there's less evapotranspiration, and so there's more water available, and you get some rain typically that time of year, which helps. For us, we have an added benefit that I wanted to note is the Bellamy Reservoir. In the watershed for the Bellamy Reservoir, there's Swains Lake, which is an upstream reservoir. It has about 80% of the surface area of the Bellamy Reservoir, so it's a pretty substantial pond, lake. But they drain that down 30 inches around mid-October. So we will expect to see the water, once they drain that, the reservoir will come up a little bit. It all depends on how moist the wetlands in the areas are between the two impoundments, but we should see a rebound just like we have in the previous year, mid to end October. So I'm hopeful. And with the rain is expected tomorrow and this weekend, and hopefully that will set up a pattern of more precipitation. Stream flow, this is a gauge just to see how much water is actually flowing into our surface water feature. This goes back to January 2024. And the black line is sort of the running stream flow levels. And if you see in July, August, September of this year, we were at record low, or at least in the lowest 10th percentile of stream flow feeding the reservoir. Groundwater, so that all had to do with surface water. Now looking at groundwater supplies. Since we were very fortunate with our water quality in the reservoir this year, we used more surface water than groundwater than we typically do in those proportions. So we see our groundwater supply wells, the water levels are actually doing very well, especially if you compare it to the 2016 levels. This is basically elevation. So the higher, the more water available, lower, the less. But as you see here that, you know, we're still sort of in that upper range of our water levels in our major aquifers. And this is just a closer view, looking more at the, this goes back to 2019, but you see the drop this summer in our groundwater levels. And we hadn't quite totally recovered in some of the wells. The green is the Greenland well. In both prior years, that aquifer is very full, and we didn't quite get there with the spring rain that we had. So, but still, compared to previous years and previous drought years, we're in good shape. This is the water production. If you see the bars on the right are this year, the blue lines on the left are the past 10-year average of our monthly average day water production. So overall, this year we've produced more water than we have on average for the past 10 years. Not by a whole lot, but so this year's average was about 4.15 million gallons per day. The 10-year average was about 4.06 million gallons per day, which is still less than prior years. So if you go back further, back to 2005 to 2014 range, our average daily production was 4.6 million gallons per day about. So yes, we are higher than average this year, but still much lower than we had been in the past. This goes back to 2004. This breaks it up by source, so that's what all the colors are. But if you just look at the top of the graph, this is sort of your total annual production and how we have dropped off come 2015, 2016. We had a decline in water production, and now we're raising up a little bit. I think this year, last year and this year spiked up, warmer weather, higher irrigation usage. And this is just a breakdown of where we're getting all the water from. As I said, this year we are pulling more water from our surface water plant. And one note I wanted to make here is if you notice from the Pease trade port, we ended up using the Pease booster. So this Pease booster pulls water from the Portsmouth system to add flow into the Pease system. We had to do that from early July to early August because the Haven well was offline. One of the drop tube for the pump had a rupture in it. So we couldn't pump water out, it just kind of recycled. And it took a long time to get a replacement on that pipe. So it was about a month that we were down, the Haven well was down. It only affected, we were able to use the Portsmouth supply to help support the water there. And these are confusing charts, but I will try to explain them. I have 3 of them here. This one looks at the Portsmouth system. The chart on the left is looking at our sustainable capacity. So that is the amount of water that we could pull out of all of our sources in the Portsmouth system sustainably, day after day, year after year, without affecting aquifer. It'll always be there based on average climatic conditions and all of that. Given our sources, that's a 4.6 million gallons a day is what our sustainable yield is from our Portsmouth sources. The chart on the right is that maximum capacity. This is if we turned all of our sources off. If for instance, the Bellamy Reservoir, the surface water treatment plant, it's rated at a 4 million gallon a day facility. So if we turn that up all the way for 4 million gallons, that would represent our maximum capacity. But the overall reservoir and the recharge to the reservoir is a 2.5 million gallon a day on a sustainable basis. So there's where you see your difference between the 2 charts. And this is just a way for us to gauge where we are with available water. So the green is what we actually use, our utilized water. The blue is what we consider residual in that capacity, if that makes sense. But this is just a way for us month to month to look to see how we're doing with our supplies, meeting our demands. Pease, notably here, the maximum capacity was reached quite very closely this year. We maxed at 1.4 million gallons per day, one of the days. I think that was our record that we were produced at Pease. Irrigation is the cause of that. And thankfully, irrigation is one of those things that we can control by putting restrictions on. So it's not too much of a concern, but it's something that we need to track and monitor that. Sustainably wise, we have a lot of water. Look at it over the year. The aquifer that's associated with the Haven well and the Smith and Harrison well is a very high producing aquifer. And if you put all the systems together, we can exchange water between Pease and Portsmouth as needed. As you saw, we pumped water from the Portsmouth system into the Pease system. That could happen the other way around too. If we look at it, the system as a whole, Portsmouth and Pease combined, these are the numbers that we can look at for what our capacity is. So just wanted to share those with you as a way that we're looking at our capacity. Our PFAS numbers, this is through Q3. So PFOA is the most common and prevalent substance throughout our sources. You see they're all around 2 parts per trillion, except for the Portsmouth well, and that's been hanging around 6 or 7, 7.2 this quarter, parts per trillion. Collins well has been dropping a little bit, but it's still right around 4 parts per trillion. In Greenland averages, this is an annual average, running average, 4.1 parts per trillion, which is just above the EPA's limit of 4.0, which may go into effect in 2029 or may go into effect 2031, depending on how the regulations change. I just want to touch on some projects here, making note of the storage tank painting project. We will be putting that project out to bid soon. With the plan to paint the spinny tank in the spring, paint the Newington booster tank next fall, and do some touch-up painting in the Lafayette tank the spring of 2026. So we have to cycle these with certain times of year, spring or fall, because those are less demand and the season is correct to do that, to be able to do the painting. But when we do that, we need to drain the tank. So there'll be a time next spring where we'll have to drain the spinny tank for a period of 4 to 6 weeks to get the painting done. So just want to put that out there. Bellamy Dam repair. We're working through a contract right now for someone to do some crack sealing and patching of the Bellamy Dam. Nothing structural, but just mostly aesthetic and good maintenance practices to keep that dam up to snuff. PFAS treatment for the Greenland well is ongoing. PFAS design for Portsmouth and Collins Wells. We've been waiting for the Air Force to assist with that, and they have shown no signs of providing any funds for that. So we are suggesting we add that into our CIP, at least for the design, so we can keep that process moving. We'll see where that goes. Service line inventory and service line replacement. Mason will talk about those in his presentation. Collins 2 well permitting, that's with the state right now. We're waiting to hear back on that. And the Seacoast Reliability Project is a project that the Seacoast Drinking Water Commission is instigating, and there's actually a presentation on that October 15th. It's a public meeting, October 15th at 6 o'clock PM at the Pease DES office. I can pass that around. That's it for me. I'll turn it over to Mariah to talk a little bit about cyanobacteria and what we've been doing at the reservoir this summer.
A couple meetings ago, I talked about just our general monitoring in the reservoir and specifically on cyanobacteria. So we just wanted to give kind of a quick update of what we experienced this year with cyanobacteria. The biggest thing I think we talked about last year was the GZA partnered with us and DES to put together a cyanobacteria monitoring plan and risk assessment. So they completed that in July of this year. This just helped us kind of improve upon our monitoring and our response plan to cyanobacteria blooms. And then also we established trigger levels or threshold levels for when we should test for cyanotoxins based on our historical data. So I put those specific concentrations and cell counts there. So phycocyanin is directly tied to freshwater cyanobacteria. It's the blue-green pigment that you see in there. So that can pick up directly on the pigment in cyanobacteria. So that's 27 micrograms per liter. And then the cell count is found through the microscope. We've New Hampshire DES gave us their protocol for counting the cells physically. So I can do that now. And the threshold value is 20,000 cells per milliliter. And again, this is for knowing when to test for cyanotoxins. For this summer, we actually didn't have so many blooms, so many severe blooms, more small scattered blooms throughout the summer from June to late August, minimal accumulation, low to zero phycocyanin concentrations and low to zero cell counts too. We had one more noticeable dense bloom on July 28th. It did trigger cyanotoxin testing in the raw water. We identified the species as Dolichiospermum and Waranachinia. I'll show you some pictures of these in the next couple of slides. And then the phycocyanin reached 30.78 micrograms per liters. The cell count was around 25,675 cells per milliliter. So as soon as we found this, we immediately collected samples from the raw water as it enters into the plant, but they were non-detect. So over the next couple of days, we just monitored the reservoir closely. Unfortunately, it passed quickly and the phycocyanin numbers dropped, as well as the cell count. This is what it looked like. It's really beautiful. It was a little different this year than we've really experienced in prior years. If you were at the last meeting, I talked about this. I showed some pictures of it. Typically, it looks like green coverage. This year, it's a little more oil spill looking. And then you'll see some brown in there. That's organic material mixed in. So this was a little bit harder to distinguish between it. But again, we're constantly monitoring those phycocyanin levels, cell counts, and visual observations too. So these are those two different species, the Dolichospermum on the left and Waranachinia on the right. Most of these are pictures I took in our microscope. They're pretty clearly different. We saw more Waranachinia this year than we've seen in previous years. That might give us a sign of why we're seeing more of an oil spill looking accumulation. So I just, based on that cyanobacteria monitoring plan, we updated our response to cyanobacteria bloom. So I'll just kind of go through this quickly. At the beginning of the summer, we deployed diffusers right at the intake, and that physically just pushes cyanobacteria and other material away so we don't take it into the intake. And we think that really helps with not pulling anything into the plant. We reduce the plant flow and rely more on well water. We introduce powdered activated carbon to bind the cyanobacteria, and then it's removed in the DAF. Increase backwash filter frequency, continue to test phycocyanin throughout the treatment plant, continue to sampling for cyanotoxin in the raw and finished water, and then our typical daily observations and weekly monitoring throughout the reservoir too. And last but not least, we recently collaborated with DES and Hazen and Sawyer. Hazen, Sawyer, and DES realized that there's about 13 water systems throughout New Hampshire that are experiencing cyanobacteria blooms on a frequent basis. So they've been taking historical data to learn more about the specifics within these surface water supplies to develop the best approach to cyanobacteria monitoring and cyanotoxin removal. So they have the past 5 years of our historical data together, and we should hear more about this in the next year. And that's it on cyanobacteria.
Are
Go
there
to, sorry.
natural
Carmen?
solutions to the cyanobacteria? Do they have, is there something that consumes them?
Yeah, and we're still learning so much more too. And I think this is some of what we'll learn through working with Hazen and Sawyer. But cyanobacteria are caused by overloading of nutrients, so nitrogen, phosphorus. So of course there are things that eat those excess nutrients. So that can help us out. Otherwise, just having less of those nutrients in the environment help too.
Those nutrients can come from the watershed, but they can also come from the sediments of the reservoir too. As it turns over, you're kind of continuing to mix those. So there are ways to manage that if it turns out to be continuing to be a problem.
And that's some of what Hazen and Sawyer is kind of going to put together for us too, some methods of having less of those nutrients.
I just had a couple follow-up questions for you, Al. One, sounds really stupid, but what do you do with the water when you drain it from the tower? Where does that go?
That's a good question. We're still trying to work out those details.
Okay.
Have any ideas? Say, can you fill swimming pools? Can you do? No.
Fill a pool.
Okay.
A lot of pools.
Several pools.
Got it. Okay. Well, then.
'Cause that's a lot of water
Okay,
to
good.
waste, so.
Yeah.
something with it.
Okay. Well, what do you normally do with it?
We haven't had to drain a tank.
Oh.
We've done all of our cleaning with the tanks full. We can get a robot in there and take care of it. So we haven't had to, I haven't been involved in painting a tank.
Okay. All right. And
Painted inside, so.
the other question was, I know that Portsmouth relative to the rest of the state is doing okay drought wise, but I'm curious what kind of conversations are happening at the state level regarding, more of an emergency situation, or maybe they're not. I mean, I'm sure they are, but you mentioned the meeting that you attended with 30 different stakeholders.
Yeah, and my takeaways from that were more agricultural impacts for what they were seeing. There are spotty supply wells, a lot of private wells going dry, just like back in 2016, where you know, people had to drill a deeper well to be able to get water. My takeaway from that was they didn't have any funding available like they did in 2016 to help people with new wells. So I don't think there's no solution out there yet.
I think that's where the interconnect comes into play in terms of the Seacoast interconnect study, and I think that's where the hope lies a little bit more, just in terms of helping out our friendly neighbor. You know, if Dover runs out of water, we'll be able to supply, but we'll see where that goes. I mean, that's a huge project and a huge undertaking, but you look at places in Maine, pretty much the whole seacoast of Maine is interconnected for that reason. You know, it's kind of in case of emergency more than anything else, so.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. So, I think a lot of folks have heard of cyanobacteria more in the context of not being safe to swim in lakes and keeping your dogs away from it and things like that. But one of the things I'm curious about is, you know, what do you do if it does get in intake? Let's say there's a large bloom. Do you have any ability to kill it? Do you have to turn the system off? Is it a big deal, or is it something you can take care of?
That's what Hazen and Sawyer is really looking at for us.
Well, I was just gonna go back to that, our response plan here. You know, we've never, that we know of so far, had cyanotoxins enter the plant, and with the phycocyanin monitoring that we do, we monitor daily throughout the summer, every single day, and even when we've had a bloom, even that one where it was 30 micrograms per liter, it was 0 entering the plant. So I think those diffusers help a lot. There might be with something with the length of time it takes to get to there, but that's still some things we're figuring out. Another thing is adding that powdered activated carbon really binds the cyanobacteria to it, and then it is removed in our DAF plant. Another great thing about the DAF plant, if you know, unlike conventional plants, we float our solids. Conventional plants sink solids, so cyanobacteria likes to float. So it's kind of helpful because cyanobacteria is naturally floating. So if it does come into our system, pretty much all of it would be removed in the DAF. And then again, you have filters after that, you have chlorination, and the toxins are the problem. It's not the cyanobacteria itself, it's what's released from them. So that's the part that we're still learning about, and that Hazen and Sawyer is going to give us more information about. But I think this whole process has really, our existing process and then these added steps, like reducing the plant flow and relying more on well water, puts us in a great place. And again, we have yet to see cyanotoxins enter the plant.
One more question, asking for some friends. So Portsmouth has the capacity to do this. I've actually seen the plant. It's really impressive what's done up there. Is it common for other water departments to have access to the same kind of technology that can do the same types of things that you can do here? Or are we kind of unique in Portsmouth?
We're unique with the DAF plant.
Yes, I mean, you can have a conversion of an existing conventional treatment plant, but it really takes saturators, and that's really the only difference between a conventional plant and ours. The saturators are doing the heavy lifting of all that material in the DAF part of the process. So in the name, it's dissolved air flotation. So you're taking dissolved air and you're physically lifting all of the sludge that you've seen in the plant to the surface. With conventional, there's no introduction of dissolved air. It's just naturally settling out once it's coagulated and all those particles come together, it sinks to the bottom. So I think if there were to be a conversion of your treatment process, there's so many different treatment processes, you know, across the board throughout the country. It would take an introduction of that dissolved air through saturators. That's what you would need.
There's another part that Hazen and Sawyer brought up too, is that they're doing some facilities, I think, is pre-treatment or pre-oxidation.
Yeah.
So basically destroying these cells as they're coming in, and then through the typical coagulation flocculation process, you can remove them.
Yeah.
It's constantly being studied, and there's no like direct answer, but
Well, that's what I was gonna just add too, is Hazen and Sawyer, for all 13 of these water systems in New Hampshire, they're taking data from each system and creating a solution specific to that system. So, you know, our reservoir, the way that it flows, everything is different from Lake Massabesic or anywhere else, you know? So it's hard to say like to give just one solution. These are naturally occurring organisms, and they've been living for billions of years. So yeah, really narrowing down the species and figuring out what toxins they're releasing, that's what Hazen and Sawyer is focusing on right now. So maybe in a year we'll have more answers on that, but there's been other systems that have experienced blooms that have had cyanotoxins enter the plant, and they've treated for it with copper sulfate, I believe, in the reservoir itself. There's some studies out there. I mean, a lot of it's happening more in the Midwest than here. It's still pretty new here right now. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Very much. Right, we'll turn it over to Dr. Laurel Shader, and she's gonna give us an update on PFAS health studies at Pease.
Great, thanks so much. Actually, I had a couple of questions from the previous presentation. On the PFAS in the drinking water, I saw you were presenting the results for the 6 PFAS that are regulated by EPA. I was wondering if you're testing for other ones. I'm more familiar with some other water systems here in Massachusetts, and I know some of the short chain like PFBA and PFHXA can break through the carbon filter. So I was wondering if that's something that you're monitoring for.
Yeah, we do all the, what are there, 30 in the 533 method for all those. Yeah, so we're seeing the PFBA, PEA is a common one. PFBS in some of the wells, Collins well has a little higher PFBS than the others, but all single digits generally.
Okay.
And I think that information is on our website too. I'll have to check the website and see. We had been updating all of those numbers at one point, so.
Okay, got it. And I was just curious, do you know what the state of New Hampshire is going to do about the EPA standards? It sounds likely that the PFOS and PFOA standards will remain, but there'll be more time for compliance, and then the other 4 are going away. And I know some of those are already regulated in New Hampshire, maybe at a little bit higher level. Do you know how the state's going to handle it if those 4 do get rescinded?
Yeah, sure.
I have an update from Brandon Kernan that I'm gonna read on that, Laurel, a little bit later in the agenda. So I checked in with him on that, and he gave me a response, so I'll share that.
Okay, great. All right, well, I can't share. It says it's not turned on.
Oh, whoops. How do you
So
do
I'm
that?
gonna send a request. Okay, I think it'll work now. Hang on. Oops. All right.
There you go.
Right. All right, well, it's great to see everyone tonight, if remotely. So tonight I'll take some time on the agenda here to talk a bit about PFAS exposure and health effects research going on at Pease. Part of this is through the PFAS REACH study, which some of you may have heard me talk about before. And I'll also share some relevant information from the ATSDR multi-site study, which includes the ATSDR Pease study. So starting with PFAS REACH, which is Research, Education, and Action for Community Health. This is an NIH-funded research study funded by the Research to Action program that funds researchers and community partners to address research questions of community concern. So Silent Spring is leading this study along with researchers from Northeastern and Michigan State Universities. We've been working with Andrea. I think it's going to be coming up on 10 years, maybe next year. So Testing for Peace has been one of our long-term community partners, as well as Mass Breast Cancer Coalition and the Slingshot organization. So REACH has 3 core study components. So one is to study the effects of PFAS exposures on children's immune system function, notably antibody levels. And this was building on research from the Faroe Islands and other places showing lower antibody production in response to routine vaccinations for kids who had higher PFAS exposure. Another component is the PFAS Exchange Online Resource Center. And then our colleague Phil Brown from Northeastern University is leading analyses of the experiences of PFAS impacted communities. So starting with the first part on the children's health study, we had a lot of delays and challenges. We hit COVID, we hit hospitals who were kind of maxed out with COVID and not able to do phlebotomy and blood draws as we'd hoped. There was the ATSDRP study that was getting underway when we were also starting our work. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the multi-site study in a few minutes, but Silent Spring is leading the Massachusetts component of that. So had kind of a lot of challenges, but we did collect blood samples and questionnaire data from 87 children. So 25 of those were from Pease, and then the others were from our multi-site study communities here in Massachusetts, the towns of Hyannis and Ayer. For our Pease kids, we were looking to include children who may have been exposed to PFAS from the drinking water at Pease before 2014, before the Haven well was shut off. That included, for our older kids, them directly being exposed to the water if they attended daycare on Pease, or indirectly if their mom worked at Pease before that time. We know PFAS can accumulate in the body over time, and unfortunately we do pass along those PFAS to the next generation through pregnancy and breastfeeding. So the blood samples were tested for 24 different PFAS compounds in a lab at Emory University, and then antibody levels were measured at LabCorp. So I'll talk just a little bit about the PFAS blood test results. Of the 24 PFAS that we tested for, 12 of them were found at least once. Many of these are familiar to those of us who work on PFAS a lot. So long chain PFAS, these are the ones that are also regulated in drinking water in New Hampshire, and at least for now across the country. So 3 of these were detected in 100% of the samples. And for those of you who took part in the ATSDR study, I'm showing here the 7 that were included in the CDC testing. And these, in some way, these detection frequencies are what we might expect even in the general population, because these long chain PFAS do accumulate in our bodies for long amounts of time. We also had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about short chain PFAS. So industry has stopped manufacturing the long chain PFAS, at least in the US and Europe, and have swapped them out for similar but shorter PFAS compounds. These short chain compounds don't tend to accumulate in blood in the same way, and they're a lot less frequently detected, but we did see a few of them showing up in a smaller percentage of the kids in our study. In comparing our 3 communities, so I'll walk you through the graph here. So these are the what we sometimes call the big 4. So the 4 PFAS that are most frequently found in the general population and in impacted communities. The blue bar here is showing the median PFAS level at Pease. Orange is Hyannis, which had higher levels of PFAS than our 3rd community, which is the town of Ayer, also in Massachusetts. What I'm showing here is the general population median level. Some of you may be familiar with NHANES. This is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's a nationwide program that the CDC conducts usually in 2-year cycles. They look at many different types of health, nutrition questions. It's a very useful resource as a benchmark for a typical level of PFAS in the general population. Because of the phase out of production in the general population, the levels for these PFAS are going down. So one challenge we had in comparing the results from our testing to the general population was that we collected our samples for Pease in 2023 and 2024. This gray bar represents the general population in 2017 to 2020. So it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, because in the general population, the levels are going down. So we estimated what the NHANES values might be if they had shared the results for later cycles of testing. So that's this kind of outline gray bar. So it's not the official NHANES number, but it's what we estimate the general population would be at the same time that we did the Pease sampling. So a couple of observations here. From earlier rounds of testing at Pease, it was observed that PFHXS was the one that was most elevated compared to the general population among people who were exposed to the water at Pease. And this is very typical of communities with firefighting foam contamination of water supplies. So even though the water's been tested has been treated for 10 years by the time that we were collecting these samples, we do still see that the blood levels are somewhat elevated compared to the general population for PFHXS. This compound stays in our body the longest compared to all the other PFAS I'm showing here. So it has what's called a half-life of something around 8 years. So what it means is that even after you stop being exposed, it takes about 8 years for the levels in your blood to go down by half, and then another half, the 8 years to go down to a quarter. So it's kind of the slowest to respond to changes in water levels. By contrast, for the other 3 PFAS, which still can stay in our body for years, but do tend to go down more quickly, we saw that the levels at Pease were more similar to the 2 other communities and to the general population. We also compared our results to and these are just for the Pease kids here in light blue, and this is compared to the DHHS testing in 2015. And to the ATS-CRP study, and those samples were collected 2019 to 2021. So we do fortunately see the levels are going down, and certainly quite a bit lower than that initial testing. So it's not unexpected, but it's very helpful to demonstrate that yes, when you turn off the exposures, that the levels do go down over time, even though it can take a while sometimes to go back to what we'd expect in the general population. So for our participants at Pease, we reported back the results just to give you a flavor for what these reports look like. My colleagues at Silent Spring have developed a tool called Derby, the Digital Exposure Report Back interface. I don't have an interactive version here, but when users log into our site, so it's a report that's available online with an access code, there are overall findings and results described in words, but also some interactive graphs. So this is showing the sum of 7 PFAS, and this is a relevant comparison because the National Academies provided some guidance in a report in 2022 about health screenings that might be appropriate for people who've had elevated exposures. And they base those comparisons on the blood test results for 7 PFAS. So a user can kind of scroll around here and there's information that shows the child's level compared to other people in the study. The little flag here shows the general US population. This is that National Academy's high health benchmark. So it helps to provide kind of layers of information for people who really want to dig into the results, as well as having some high level findings. All of our reports also have the community level findings. So the graphs that I just shared were part of that report. We also created a 2-page summary, which is available on our PFAS Exchange website for people who want to see what we found. So in terms of next steps, again, with the challenges that we encountered with the study, we do still want to try some different ways of analyzing our data to see if there's anything that we can learn about relationships between PFAS levels in blood and antibody levels and reported symptoms of infectious disease. I'll note that this is also something that the multi-site study is tackling with a larger population of kids. We may be able to learn a little bit more about the rates of change in PFAS blood levels over time among our kids by looking at their results from earlier testing at an individual level. For our participants, we also asked them some questions about the foods that they ate, consumer product use, and different types of flooring in the house. So for instance, wall-to-wall carpeting can be a source of PFAS exposure in the home. And these types of exposures may be the most important explanatory factors for understanding kids' current PFAS blood levels, again, because the elevated PFAS levels from drinking water were a number of years in the past. I also wanted to mention the third part of the PFAS REACH study, which was to better understand the experiences of impacted communities and also to see what we could learn about what are the determinants of a community where there's a grassroots organization that gets started and a sort of organic movement to push for blood testing or health studies, and why other communities might not have that kind of active response in the same way. So for this study, we interviewed community members at Pease and in Hyannis. Maybe some of you were part of our study. And some of the key takeaways that we found were that the responses seem to vary depending on the source of contamination. So At Pease, it was the former military base, and Hyannis, it was municipal source. It was the county fire chain area. There were some different demographic factors, different involvement of legislators. So it was kind of a compare contrast and an interesting social science analysis, which is not something I'm as familiar with, to see what we could learn and apply to potentially other communities as well. I'll switch gears now to talk a little bit more about the multi-site study. So this is a study that's happening in 8 states across the country. It's funded by the CDC and by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or ATSDR. And the main overall goal is to improve our understanding of how PFAS can affect our health. There are communities like Pease all across the country where people got exposed to higher levels of PFAS in their water in the past. Water is being treated, but there's still something that we can potentially learn from those past exposures. And in communities across the country, people do want to take part in these kinds of studies to have their exposures matter and to make sure that future regulations are really protecting people's health. And so the map here is showing the 8 states that are in the study, and Pease has kind of a unique part of the study because it was actually the first part. It was before there was the multi-site study, it was just the ATSDR Pease study. So it was the first site, it was kind of the proof of concept, and the protocols that were used at Pease were then adapted for the other 7 sites. So ATSDR was the lead on the Pease study, and they are funding research teams in 7 other states to work with local communities. So Silent Spring Institute is leading the Massachusetts part of this in Hyannis and Air. This slide comes from a webinar that ATSDR organized in July, talking about the multi-site study as a whole. So this shows the number of adults and children who took part in the study. And I wanted to put this up to show that the Pease study, in terms of the numbers of participants that are taking part, is a really important contributor. And the more people that take part in this study, the more statistical power that we have to be able to look at these statistical links between PFAS exposures and health effects. And in particular, the Pease study did a really great job at recruiting children. Not that the sites were competitive with each other, but we did all note that the Pease study had more kids than any of the other sites. So if you're curious to know a little bit more about what the multi-site study has found so far, there was a paper that was published earlier this year that presented the community level PFAS blood test results. So ATSDR, in collaboration with some of the sites, so I was pretty involved with developing this 2-page fact sheet that summarizes the key findings. And I'll note that even though all the communities have been addressing the PFAS drinking water for a number of years, some PFAS, particularly PFOA and PFH excess, still show elevated levels compared to the general US population. To better visualize that, again, the link is here too if you want to delve into this a little bit more after the meeting. The blue bars are showing the 8 individual sites. This gold bar is showing the general US population. Again, this was collected earlier. This was 2017 to 2020. So probably a bit higher than the general population would have been at the same time that these samples were collected. And I'll just note here how New Hampshire, AKA the Pease study, compares. And so for PFAS and PFH excess as a site with firefighting foam contamination, it's not surprising that Pease is showing up here in the sites with the highest average levels. So what's next for the multi-site study? So if you want to get a sense of where the health effects research is at, there is a set of slides and a video from this webinar that ATSDR held in July. And as part of that, the research teams provided some initial findings on health outcomes. And here's the list of the initial 7 health effects that are the focus of the kind of the first round of analyses. I know people will be curious to know when some of this work will be published. The results here are preliminary, so not yet in a peer-reviewed publication. Realistically, I think the earliest papers probably won't get published until spring, given the extended timeline with needing CDC clearance. And that, if the government shutdown continues, that will be even more delayed. And then once you submit a paper to a journal, it takes often months before it might be published. One of the unique parts of the multi-site study is also beyond just looking at what was in the PFAS levels in participants' blood at the time they took part in the study, which is a snapshot of exposure. It gives you a sense of exposures in recent years. Another component is to try to go back further in time, especially because the sites, some of them had quite high levels of PFAS in the drinking water 10, 20, 30 years ago. We're not necessarily capturing that by just looking at a more recent blood sample. So each site is also tasked with estimating past drinking water concentrations, and ATSDR had previously done this work for the Pease drinking water supply. And then we're applying what's called a pharmacokinetic model. So we're using that estimated drinking water concentrations, as well as information about where people lived. Were they people who drank bottled water, tap water? Did they have a filter? And we're using that to go back and try to estimate PFAS blood levels in people's bodies going back to the year 2000. And this is really important for thinking about questions of cumulative exposures over time. When we're looking at health conditions, a lot of health conditions were diagnosed 10 or 20, 30 years ago. It's not that helpful to look at a blood sample from 2023 if we're seeing if that might have caused someone's hypertension that was diagnosed in the year 2000. So this reconstruction is a kind of unique part of the multi-site study, and I think will be powerful in extending what we're able to learn. And last thing, if you want to learn more about PFAS, I would recommend you take a look at our PFAS Exchange website. This is intended to support PFAS impacted communities and really anyone hoping to learn more about PFAS. We've got fact sheets to address commonly asked questions on health effects and how to reduce exposures in drinking water. We've got a data interpretation tool, so it applies that Derby report in a way where users in real time can type in results of blood or water testing. As you can tell, PFAS is kind of this acronym stew. For people who aren't steeped in this stuff all the time, it can be really hard to understand the results of those types of testing. And there's also a map that shows known and likely contamination sites built on a database compiled by our colleagues at Northeastern University. I wanted to mention some resources we have on our site related to PFAS blood testing, which is a question that we often hear questions about. People want to know what their blood levels are. They want to maybe be able to test over time to look at changes. So we've got a general fact sheet and information about blood testing labs. And then for people who've had elevated exposures, you often say, well, go ask your doctor what that means. Doctors often haven't really heard a lot about PFAS. So we created a continuing medical education course that clinicians can take for CME credit, or if you just want access to the content, you can watch it on YouTube. And then we've also created medical screening guidance documents. Andrea was a key part in both of these resources. We also worked with medical doctors, and we, based on a comprehensive assessment of the types of health effects linked with PFAS exposures, and based on a medical monitoring program developed from the C8 study in West Virginia, have created a set of suggestions for the types of screenings that doctors might want to consider for people who've had elevated exposures. So with that, thanks so much for inviting me. Thanks for allowing me to join by Zoom, which saves 2 or 3 hours in the car. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the update. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Laurel. I did notice that the study had showed that men have more PFAs than women. Was there any reason for that or any scientific reasoning or?
Yeah, there are 2 factors that are thought to contribute to that. So PFAS bind really tightly to the proteins in our blood. So women menstruate, which means we lose blood every month from our bodies. And so it is a way that PFAS can leave the body more quickly for women than for men. So that's one reason. And the second reason, as I mentioned, is that PFAS do get passed along during pregnancy and through breast milk. So we do see as women have more kids that the levels in their blood go down more quickly.
Thank you.
I had a question about that actually. glad that you mentioned that, just about passing the PFAS off to your offspring. When you were starting this study, at least at the start of your presentation, how did you go about selecting your sample pool? And did you end up testing the parents of those children that you were also testing?
Yeah, great question. So for the PFAS REACH study for the kids, we recruited pretty far and wide. It was definitely a challenge to recruit children during the pandemic. It was hard because a lot of people had already brought their kids in to be part of the ATSDR study. And we also had some criteria because we had these questions about antibody response. And so we were actually looking for certain age groups within a kind of a 3-year window after the DTaP vaccination. So we put some constraints on ourselves in that way, which made it harder. So we our only criteria were that these were kids who potentially had been exposed to PFAS in the drinking water at Pease back before the Haven well was shut off and the treatment was put in place. For REACH specifically, we did not also include parents just because it was kind of a smaller study. But through the multi-site study for kids who are in that, we often have information from moms, because most of the time if a child participated, their mother and sometimes their dad also took part in the study.
Okay, great, thank you. One more quick question about that, actually. Did you ask the participants, whether they were children or adults, if they were bottled water drinkers over, the public water supply?
We did, yeah. And the Pease study is a little bit different because all the other 7 sites are based in communities where people might have been exposed at home. So it's a residential exposure. So Pease is a little bit different. And so I'm more familiar with the details of the multi-site questionnaire. But it was based on the Pease study questionnaire. So I think it was similar. And yes, we did ask questions about whether people were consuming bottled water or tap water. We asked questions about filtration. Again, the Pease study was earlier in a little bit different setting. I know for the multi-site study, we asked about water in people's homes. We did only ask about their current address and one previous address, just to strike a balance between asking 500 questions, but making sure we had enough, which would have been preferable to get a lot of information, but not wanting the questionnaire to take a long time. So there's some gaps in terms of people's earlier habits if they lived in different homes in the study area over time. But I think we did a reasonable job at capturing that to the best that people are able to remember. It's also a challenge to think about that.
A lot of challenges, I'm sure.
So many
with all that,
factors.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other
A great
questions?
presentation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Laurel. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so it looks like our next agenda item is the Seacoast Drinking Water Commission, and I think Representative David Muse is going to share a little information about that for us.
Stop sharing, maybe. Should come this back to. No, she's just on.
Yeah, Laurel, do you mind?
She's not sharing right now.
She's not. Oh, okay.
We're just on.
Back to her.
Whoops, sorry.
Right there.
There you go. Okay. Next.
There's a lot going on here.
This is a commission that I've personally served on for the last, I think it's 4 years now. Essentially, this one's a little bit different. We've had commissions in the past that essentially have been put together for maybe a year or two to deliver reports on a single topic, and they kind of come and go. This one was actually designed to stay in place for a while. And I think the main driver behind the legislation for this commission is just the fact that in New Hampshire, like many places around the country, are the folks who actually control our water supply and our local water supplies are pretty balkanized. So there isn't a lot of back and forth between different communities unless they're part of some type of, regional water company or organization. And in New Hampshire, a lot of our water supply comes from municipal water companies. So the issue is if something happens, some type of a contamination event or something like that, you could have a situation where an entire town all of a sudden doesn't have access to water, or a lot of people in the town don't have access to water. So one of the things that we tried to get a handle on is, well, in seacoast communities, what percentage of people actually have access to a public drinking water supply, and how many people are on wells, and what are some of the issues with each? So if we move on to the next slide, one of the things that there essentially have been a wide number of topics for conversation over the years. So a big one has been preparation for things like drought. I think the what if scenarios in terms of what happens in the event of a contamination event, or some type of system failure has been another thing that's been a big topic of conversation. One of the most interesting things for me is just the interchange between the different people on the commission. So we have a mix of legislators, people who work for communities, in water departments like you folks, and just seeing the interchange, especially early on, between people in different towns around how they did things and what do you do in this situation, what do you do in that situation. That actually at one point led us to actually ask all the people running or participating from the different water companies or water departments across the seacoast to actually do presentations on how they did it. And some of those were more interesting than others. I thought the Portsmouth one was really interesting. But you learn a lot. I mean, you learn like neighboring cities like or a neighboring town like Stratham. Over 90% of the people in Stratham are on well water. And one of the things you also learn, because we have New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services coming to our meetings and giving us constant updates on things like PFAS. One of the things that they dial up on the that they dial up in a presentation is a heat map they do of contaminated wells and wells contaminated with PFAS. And you look at it, and one of the things you kind of notice is, well, gee, the Portsmouth area doesn't seem to have a lot of well contamination. And the reason for that is because most of our people are on a public water supply. So what it does though is it makes people realize that, okay, if you're not on a public water supply, the purity of your water, that you drink can be at risk. So one of the big efforts that the commission has undertaken in recent years is a private well testing program. And that's actually been conducted. I'm not sure if we've done one in Portsmouth because we don't have that many private wells, but I know.
Included on that, yeah, we were included.
With Greenland and Newington, I think, right, when they did that.
But I know in places like Stratham and Madbury and some of the other towns, they did it and actually got very good participation. People who participated received a report. People who found out that there was stuff in their water that shouldn't be there, were directed to resources, in some cases even to financial resources that could help them with remediation in the wells. So it's a really valuable program. And I think our only regret from that is that maybe it would have been nice if a few more people would have taken advantage of it. But the bottom line is there were a fairly sizable number of people who did take advantage of it. And it was a good thing. The Seacoast Interconnection Study Update, that's something that we're actually going to hear more about next week. I think the big news there was a few years ago, there were plans to put together or to build an emergency water connection between Dover and Portsmouth. And the grand plan was to put it in a pipe under the old General Sullivan Bridge, which always seemed like a strange thing to do if you've ever driven past the General Sullivan Bridge and looked at it just about ready to rust into Great Bay. So at some point, I think one of the things that came back was there was the bid to actually do the construction to reinforce and rebuild the bridge was actually twice as much as they were expecting. I think it was like around $80 million. So essentially, the interconnection is sort of moving into Plan B mode. And one of the other things that could affect that too is that unlike a few years ago when there was a substantial amount of federal money available for new drinking water infrastructure and for projects like this, those resources have significantly contracted in 2025. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around how much money is going to be available, what would the local contribution be, how much would that local contribution have to be in order to get something built? And meanwhile, the cost of actually building something increases every year that we don't build something. So that's one of the things that we're up against too. So I'm actually going to be really interested to sort of hear the results of the study. And I don't know, Al, if you've heard anything.
My understanding too, this is the scope was very broad view, overview of the potential connections, got into some of the details, but it got to that level, and then we'll see how much ones that would make most sense, how much would they cost? That'll be sort of the next step. But yeah, I'm interested to see. I have only been involved as part of getting data and seeing what they are putting together. But
It's sort of a really good way to sum up the work of this commission is some of the stuff we talk about would make your hair stand on end, like saltwater intrusion because of sea level rise and stuff like that. What happens to all those people on wells that would have contaminated wells and things like that. So a lot of it is having conversations around things like that. And I think one of the best parts of it is the fact that it kicks off conversations between people in different communities. So instead of you feeling like I have to deal with this all by myself, I've never had to deal with this before, what do I do? You actually have people you can go to, and sometimes those people have actually dealt with these issues, if not in their current community, in another community. So it's good, solid work, and I wish we did more work like this in the legislature.
Yeah.
thank you.
That was awesome.
Can I
Yeah,
just
thank
ask a
you for
quick
that.
question? So what exactly is this meeting next week? It's on the interconnection study, but it's a public meeting. Are they looking for public comment? or
No,
It's just like an
my
update?
understanding is it's more technical. It's going to be inviting all the water suppliers that were involved in the study to
Okay.
give them sort of their findings
Okay,
study.
so there's no
But
public.
is welcome
there's
because
no-
public funds went into doing this project, so it needs to be a
It's
public meeting.
the study is going to be a big part of actually getting funding to build anything and to actually do the interconnection work we've been talking about for like the last 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that update.
All right, switching gears, cyanobacteria, PFAS, now lead, another major topic of conversation. I know you guys love this theme to my PowerPoint, so I thought I'd bring it back again. Aesthetically, it's gonna look the same and a little redundant, but there's a lot of updates to the content of these slides. So we're gonna start off with the timeline update again. So earlier this year, we did apply for and received funding through SRF loan with 71% forgiveness, $3.5 million to help with our identification efforts of service lines, as well as our replacement efforts on the front of galvanized steel lines. The current inventory status, we have a little under 500 private side service lines left to investigate and to inspect. And on the city side, we have a lot more. We have a little over 2,000 that we have to visually inspect. But that's out of 8,700 between both systems, so we're in fairly good shape there. The current update on the next submission of the inventory for both the Portsmouth and the Pease Trade Port water systems is going to be November 1st. That's when it's due. So those numbers will be submitted to the state. And we have notification letters that have to be sent out to all of our customers with unknown or galvanized services within 30 days of that submission. And we're going to continue identifying service lines that are unknown and replace galvanized services as they come up. So just to break down the status of the inventory a little bit more, as mentioned, we have 8,700 services to take care of. As everyone knows, we have split ownership of every service line. So the customer owns half and we own the other half. We're responsible for that. Out of that, I like to just show the customer side of these service lines and the materials that, you know, make up the entirety of the system on that side, because historically speaking, if we came across galvanized at any point in time, we would have replaced our side, but we would have mentioned it to the homeowner, and it would be up to them whether or not they'd want to replace it. So thinking about that, the customer-owned portion of the service line is kind of worst case scenario. You know, historically speaking, they could have a very old service. We have only 131 identified as galvanized, but 87% of them are copper. The rest are HDPE. And again, we have 486 left to identify. So with the customer notice letters that are going to come within November, I just wanted to lay this out for all of our consumers who might be watching this presentation out there. There are 3 different template letters that we're using. One is for the galvanized steel lines, which suggests replacement. And with the funding that I already mentioned, we'll get into that a little bit more in terms of offering financial assistance to those customers to replace them. And the other 2 templates are, you know, one for the unknowns on the city side, which requires no further action. We're going to have to pothole at some point. And the last one is unknown on the customer side. It really just prompts scheduling an inspection by someone from our water meter crew department to go out there into their basement and to perform a scratch test, see what type of material their service line is made of on their side. So information that's included in these letters, this is the same letter that everyone received last year. So it might be, you know, a repeat letter that they're seeing. Really breaks down the health effects of lead, what you can do to reduce exposure. The big one is the opportunity to test your drinking water for lead. We've had a lot of good response from last year, just sending out these letters. A lot of people participated in that, and that's being paid for by the state. Information that is not included in these letters, just because all of the language is required by the state and federal government. And it's very important to know that we have yet to find any lead service line throughout both the Pease Trade Port system as well as the Portsmouth water system. And annual monitoring of lead within our drinking water out in the distribution system is very promising. It's great data. We've come nowhere near the action level, and we'll get into that toward the end of this presentation too. Aside from that, you know, the source of lead doesn't always come from the service line itself. It can come from internal plumbing, lead solder connecting that plumbing, and old fixtures throughout the home. When we're talking about New England, there's a lot of old homes out there, so that's something to really be cognizant of. So dipping into the potholing efforts, that will start either tomorrow or the next day. We're going to start with, I guess I should start by saying $2 million of the $3.5 million that we received through the SRF loan is going to be designated strictly to potholing efforts to tackle the 2,000 city-side unknowns that we have yet to visually inspect. And so with that, we're going to tackle this with a statistical analysis approach, which is approved by the state. So developed areas that were all built around the same time within the same span of, 2 to 3 years. We can pothole 36% of that development to kind of rule out the rest. It's just a more efficient way of going about all of these potholes. It's a very extensive effort. So we're gonna start with Maple Haven, is the development that's kind of gonna be a test run for us with this whole, randomly selecting properties within this area to pothole. The notification letters have already been sent out to 23 properties. And yes, we should be starting tomorrow or the next day. So on the front of galvanized service replacements, we've gotten some questions about this, especially from people who are looking to replace their lines. We don't yet have the plan set in stone yet, but that is to come. There's a lot of coordination and many steps to really hone in on how we're going to financially assist customers with these replacements. Some customers could have a very lengthy service line that is 200 feet long, let's say. That's going to require a lot more time, energy, effort, and money to do that. So we're trying to figure out a way to really financially assist people across the board. But $1.5 million is going to go toward those replacements of 131 galvanized lines. I thought I'd just show that picture in the bottom right. That's what happens with a galvanized line over time, just due to old age. You have some, tubercules on the inside of the pipe that are just building up, constricts the pipe. You have reduced water pressure. They could break at any moment. It's not just the water quality concerns, but the physical concerns in terms of an emergency situation. So next steps with the whole inventory. We're hiring contractors to assist with the identification and the replacement efforts. Those RFPs will be going out soon. We're providing pitcher filters to homeowners following their galvanized service replacements. We have to identify and verify 100% of unknown service line materials by 2037. And we have to replace all of those galvanized services by 2037. And last but not least, we have to lower the lead action level is going to be lowered from 15 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion starting a couple years from now. We're not worried about that just because of our corrosion control treatment practices that we have online. It really just prevents the corrosion of the interior of these pipes throughout the system. And this data really kind of lays that out. So with the regulatory changes to the lead and copper rule improvements, we had to completely wipe out our whole sample pool that we were originally sampling from to replace them with only properties with galvanized services. So this data on the left shows all of the concentrations of lead that we were testing for out of 31 properties. 29 of them were non-detect for lead. One of them was less than 2 parts per billion, and one was between 2 and 5 parts per billion. And again, that could come from the internal plumbing, old fixtures, things like that. The chart on the right really just breaks down more over the past 2 years. All of the samples that we've collected and tested from galvanized services alone, out of a little over 80 homes. So 78 of those samples were non-detect. 4 of them 1 to 2 parts per billion, and so on. The exceedance that was above 15 parts per billion was from a 3rd floor bathroom tap. It was a really old fixture. And this is breaking that down a little bit further in terms of our lead and copper monitoring that we're required to carry out through the state regulation year after year. So this year, based on Q3 data, we have a 90th percentile of lead at 0, meaning out of 90% of the sample pool, out of those 31 sites, they were non-detect. And the 90th percentile for copper is 0.121 parts per million, the action level associated with copper is 1.3 parts per million. So we're really not concerned about that reduction from 15 to 10. If we were to exceed that at any point in time, which we've come nowhere near that, historically speaking, we would have to send out, we'd have to go through the mass communication efforts, send out letters to every customer throughout our system, and really modify our corrosion control treatment processes. And with that, that's pretty much it.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
You had said you give pictures to people after the galvanized replacement. Why would it be, what is
That-
replacing it?
Yeah, so that was. Yes, so we do give it to them, we offer it to them prior to replacement, but we have to continue to provide them picture filters throughout, even after the process. You can have disturbance of the line. And if there was ever a lead connector to that galvanized service, then you're sloughing off lead and it's entering the home. And we want to make sure that that's being removed.
Was it indefinitely? Or after like a certain amount of time that it's been replaced, you don't have?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
6
Do you
months
know that?
and testing is part of that too, then
Okay.
between 3 and 6 months after we test again to make sure there's no lead and then
Okay,
that's part of the EPA rule.
okay. And then I have a question about the potholing that you're talking about, like that's gonna start in Maple Haven and go to other neighborhoods, so is that very disruptive to neighborhoods, or is it just like one, how big of a hole do you guys drill, and like what could community members expect?
It's not very big, it's about that.
Just around the curb stop valve.
So it's using a vacuum truck, a vacuum excavator.
Okay,
Really, they're just drawing out all the dirt around the curb stop or the shut-off valve located out in front of a property. It's very isolated and targeted to that curb stop. And whatever is dug up, we replace it, we loam and reseed.
the same day, like
Same
they
day.
get covered over the same day,
Yep.
there's not like a hole left
Yep.
over, okay,
All these properties were pre-screened by our distribution crew who is gonna be doing this work.
okay.
So if they saw that the curb stop or shut off was, within pavement, that's too difficult to break apart and get down to. So we really just chose, they are randomly selected, but we keep that in mind in terms of the ease of access to
Okay,
the
The
service.
curb stop valve location is on the property boundary too, so it's city property we're digging into.
Okay.
Some places at Maple Haven, I drove by there today and the curb stops are up people lawn, like that's really the property boundary,
yeah, okay,
so it's interesting.
good to know, all right, thank you very much.
My house.
Are you in Maple Haven?
Yeah.
Oh, you
Oh,
are,
wow.
okay. Did you get a letter?
No.
Okay,
Huh.
so you're good.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I see Laurel has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a question. There's so much news coming out of DC, it's a little hard to keep up with it all, but I thought I heard that future federal budgets might cut the state revolving fund quite substantially. I don't know if you've heard any updates about that, and will that impair your ability to keep doing this work?
You wanna see?
Well, I think it's still way up in the air of what's gonna happen with that. I was telling Brandon told me a while ago that there are funds now to maintain the way that they have been for a certain amount of time. So how long that is, I don't know. The SRF funds, they're dedicated. We have those funds, especially for the lead copper. That's 3.5 million SRF. Those have already been committed. Those are already in hand.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the water main flushing program.
Watching program. Topics we haven't talked about yet, and I figured it'd be a good chance to talk about flushing and a little bit about the distribution system. We're covering a lot of different topics tonight.
No.
But so especially now that we're in a drought, we are still flushing, we're in the middle of flushing right now. And the question is, why would we do that in the middle of a drought? So I kind of wanted to explain why we flush. Primary purposes are to maintain water quality. Over time, mineral deposits occur within pipes, especially in slow moving water. And over time, and by flushing the pipes, you get to move all the debris, the accumulated deposits on the pipes This especially is the case with older pipes. Cast iron pipes could have more corrosion on the inside of the pipe, so you get the rust that needs to move through, moving water quickly through that. Reducing water age is another one. There's places in the system where there's not much water use and you have really old water. And by flushing, you get that chance to really move water through there. You get a new chlorinated batch of water through the main, increasing the chlorine residual throughout the system. The further away you get from the source where the chlorine's been added, that chlorine gets eaten up. And by flushing, you move that chlorine into places where it may not get very high levels on a normal day. And last but not least is the inspection of the hydrants and the testing of the functionality, which is extremely important that that's done routinely. So backing up to the overall distribution system. So all the blue lines here are the Portsmouth and Pease water mains. We have about 192 miles of water main that we own and maintain. We have 5 water storage tanks, the Newington booster tank here, the Spinney Road tank, and the Lafayette tank down here are part of the Portsmouth water system. The Hobbs Hill tank and the Air National Guard are part of the Pease system. We do not own or operate the National Guard tank. That is a part of our system, so it fills and drops just the way our Hobbs Hill tank moves, but we're not responsible for maintaining that tank. That's Air National Guard. We have 2 water systems that we operate, the Portsmouth system and the Pease system, which we talked about. Also on this map is the Newcastle system. We are not the operators or owners of that system, but we are the sampling agent for them. So we do all of the water quality monitoring for them. And the wells, there are 7 wells as part of the Portsmouth system. 4 of those are in Madbury, which are in the upper left portion here past Little Bay. All the sources from Madbury flow down through the transmission main across Little Bay, to the Newington booster tank. And then all of the other in-town wells for Portsmouth wells, we have the Collins well, the Portsmouth well, and the Greenland well that are part of the Portsmouth system. They all pump directly into the distribution system. And the Pease system, we have the Smith well, the Harrison well, and the Haven well, which all pump into the PFAS treatment facility at Pease to be treated before being distributed through the Pease system. Put this schematic on here to try to explain the pressures in the system. So, these wells are pumping into the system. All the sources from Madbury are pumping into the system from the Newington booster station. And what's maintaining that pressure in the overall system is the height of the water in the storage tanks. So these are just pumping in, but it's really the level of the water in the tanks that are causing the back pressure on the system. And if you note here, the Pease system has a higher hydraulic grade line than the Portsmouth system. That means the pressure is higher over there by about 25 pounds per square inch. The water from Madbury flows into the Newington booster tank. So the Newington booster pumps actually pump the water to that higher grade line that we see, the Spinney Road tank and Lafayette tank. And these are the tanks that maintain the pressure in the Portsmouth system. So when I say we're going to take one offline to paint it, we're going to be relying heavily on the Lafayette tank to be maintained at a full level to maintain the pressure in the system during that time. And the hydrants. We have over 1,000 publicly owned hydrants in the Portsmouth and Pease systems combined. And there are 555 privately owned hydrants. These are companies, private developments and such that have private hydrants that they maintain. So that's a lot of hydrants to flush. Back to the flushing program part of this, there is a New Hampshire DES rule that has some specifications in it for a minimum frequency of at least once every 2 years. Your whole system should be flushed. We do it twice a year. Public notice before you flush is required. And the rule says flush until the water runs clear at least 2.5 feet per second in the pipe. That's a lot of water moving very quickly through that pipe. So here's a breakdown. So if we have a 12-inch pipe, when we're flushing, we need to flush 881 gallons a minute out of that hydrant to be able to reach that velocity. A lot of it is that velocity. And typically hydrants are 500, 800 feet apart. typically. So if you ran at that rate for about 5 to 8 or 9 minutes, you'd clear out that section of pipe. So that's what we do when we flush. You go hydrant to hydrant, opening the hydrants and clearing out those sections of pipe. So here's some details on our program. This is semi-annual flushing. Springtime, we usually start in early April. Fall, we start early October. Typically 6 weeks of flushing, Monday through Thursday nights from 7 to 11 PM at night. And we typically, when we can get it, we have 3 crews out doing that. Our public notice is posted through Portsmouth Herald. And it's on our city newsletter and posted on the city website. Generally, the way we approach this, and this is really general, but we try to go from our sources, from our tanks and from our wells where the clean water is, and move our way into the downtown area. So we have our tank out here in Lafayette, we have Greenland Well here, we have our sources from Madbury here, and kind of work in this direction down to towards the downtown. The downtown is the last place that gets flushed in later in October, early November timeframe. And we need to take things into consideration. So the drought was something this year where we had to balance the need to maintain the water quality with our amount of water that we're using to do this. So we did reduce the amount of flushing this year. Instead of the 6 weeks of flushing, we're anticipating 4 weeks of flushing. We are focused on dead ends, old cast iron mains, older pipes, troubled areas, things like that to flush those areas. The newer pipes, we're not going to touch this time of year. Next spring, we'll get those. We also need to be done before things get too cold. We can't spray water in the streets when it's freezing outside. So we need to be done. We shoot for by mid-November to get things done. And then of course, storms and staffing is always something to consider when we're putting the schedule together for flushing. And after the hydrants are flushed, we need to winterize the hydrants, which means we need to pump the water out of them. They're a standing column hydrants, so they are filled with water. So we physically have to pump that water back down so it doesn't freeze in the hydrant. And if you've noticed, all the hydrants around town have different colored caps. They have a meaning to it from the National Fire Protection Association classification, where the blue is the highest capacity gallon per minute out of those hydrants. The red is the lowest, less than 500 gallons a minute is anticipated from those hydrants. And part of our inspections, when we're out there flushing, we take a look at the conditions of the hydrants and keep track of that in our database. I don't know, Chief, did I miss anything?
Oh, you got it all.
Hydrants are important. The inspection is important to do, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's one thing right here to stress, right? Flushing is a big deal for us, especially a system like Portsmouth. We want to make sure all the residue is out, and it's certainly not as bad as it once was. But with some of the smaller mains in an old city, you know, you get into the south end, and it can be really problematic when you're talking about a hydrant there on the lower right corner that's only at 500 gallons a minute. The reason that these things are important to us is because our trucks typically only carry 500 gallons of water a minute. So, excuse me, a tank. So for us to be able to show up effectively, put water on a fire, you know, to deploy one hand held hose line with a couple of people, we're flowing about 175 gallons a minute. So those guys who are operating inside a fire at an immediately dangerous to life and health situation are relying on either the operator of the truck that they're assigned to or the next in fire truck to get a hydrant, secure the water, and get it to them before their fire flow inside the building runs out, which is going to be less than 5 minutes. So the sort of working agreement that we have with the water department is that these things will be maintained, they'll be upkept, and that they'll operate when we need them. So to Al's point, that's why we think that you know, doing a hydrant flush during a drought is an excellent idea and a wise use of resources.
Yeah, and on that point, so overall water use, we estimate about 7 billion gallons is used through a flushing period. So overall 14 to 15 million gallons over a year. And so for one season, that's about 3 days of water supply for Portsmouth. So kind of have to take that into consideration.
I have a question. It's more of a personal question, but can you find out when they're gonna flush on your street?
I wish. I wish we had a really good system to be able to do that.
I have to change my water filters, you know, and I don't wanna change it before you flush, because then it'll just have
Yeah,
to change it again.
yeah, there's been discussion of how can we put these maps so they're interactive, but the routes change. How many crews do you have? You don't know how far you're gonna go. So what we say is, you know, keep your window shades open so you can see the lights flashing, you know, and then you'll know when to
See the water running down the street, I guess.
Avoid doing it during April and October.
Yeah, right.
Any change outs?
I have a question. Oh, sorry, you were,
No,
one of them is on here,
different
so,
topic.
but I do have a question about the fire hydrants that only have 500, like the ones on the right. Can those be upgraded? Or is it just because they're in like older parts of the city? I don't know, like.
Yeah, so there's two parts of that. There's, if it's, part of it is related to the pressure in the tanks, so where it's situated in the tanks, but it also has to do with the condition of the pipes. We have older pipes and a lot of tuberculation. Those pipes that might have been 8 inch at one point in time might only be 2 or 4 inches inside, so you're not moving as much water. So even with that pressure, you wouldn't be able to get the volume out of it. So that's part of
Okay,
what we're doing, is upgrading the water mains wherever we can
okay.
to focus on that.
I have another question on that too. I live on the corner of Aldrich Court, and up on top, there's a fire, I think it's a fire hydrant. It's basically a 4 inch thing.
I don't know, is that a?
That's a private irrigation system.
That's what?
It's an irrigation system. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's not a city hydrant.
It's,
Somebody own that.
right, no one has irrigation there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a fun time.
I can wait. Well, it's about the painting again. I know it's a little off topic, but going back to the water tower, because you mentioned it again in this presentation. And does the paint have to be waterproof on the interior? And if it is it PFAS free?
Yes. It's gonna be professional.
Okay, I just had to ask. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. I had that question
That's
last time.
too, because that's the name.
Okay.
So this is so an event that we had July 31st this year. Had a dirty water notice, colored water notice that went out. I just wanted to review what happened at that time. So all the water, like I said, from the Madbury sources comes through a 20-inch transmission main to the Newington booster station. And then from there, it's pumped through a 20-inch main into the city. These red lines are sort of the main trunks of the city where a lot of the water flows. And we had a really high demand day on July 30th. So in the evening of July 30th, our operator turned the Newington booster pumps up a little higher, not much, maybe 200 gallons a minute more than typical. But it created just enough velocity in this pipe to scour some of the debris on that transmission main. Oops. And as it came through, we started getting complaints in these areas down here that were right off the trunk line here. Water's flowing down through here, through these larger mains and affecting these water users first. So we started getting calls from them with discolored water. And we immediately got, I think, 3 crews out there to start flushing the hydrants, but that's all we tried to chase it down, flush the hydrants to clear the colored water out. And what it was just what typically accumulates on the mains. It's iron and manganese deposits. So wasn't anything hazardous, but it was certainly disconcerting when you turn your tap on and you see brown water coming out. So that was an unforeseen event, and it has raised our attention towards how we can flush a 20-inch main and actually get that scour velocity through hydrants. It's going to have to be a coordinated event when we open all the hydrants out and turn the pumps up. After we'll do a public notice before that happens, we're gonna be ready for it. But that was just that event that I wanted to bring up. Oh, and so talking about all the things distribution wise, we do a lot for the distribution system, leak detection. We're doing once a year, we try to do a third of the system to get a contractor out to listen for leaks. Oftentimes these are smaller leaks that go undetected because they don't surface, but they're constantly there and they're constantly losing water. So that is, we'll be working on that in the next month or two. Valve exercising is critical to make sure the support valves throughout the system can operate when you need them to operate. We have a hydraulic model for the system that we are continuously updating. And we use that model when a new demand might come on, a new hotel, a new industry or something, to see how the demands that they're predicting would potentially impact the water system. Our water storage tank inspections are required every 5 years. We do that, and tank cleaning. And we have ongoing water main replacement projects, and our crews are ready for water main breaks. I think we've had almost upward to 30 main breaks this year so far. So it's always happening, and unfortunately it happens over Christmas and New Year's. This past year was horrible. I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so we have 3 more agenda items and we'll move through them quickly. We wanted to give an update on PFAS. So at our June meeting, we had Brandon Kernan from New Hampshire DES give us an update. Just as a brief refresher, in April of 2024, the EPA finalized drinking water standards, or MCLs, for 6 PFAS. And then earlier this year, I think in May, they came out and they were sued by the American Water Works Association. EPA was for those. And then EPA came out earlier this year and said that they were going to request a delay on reviewing the lawsuit, but essentially that they were likely not going to defend 4 of the 6 PFAS. And also they were gonna push out the date of compliance from 2029 to 2031. So we just wanted to give an update that on September 11th, the EPA asked the district court to vacate the agency's own drinking water standards for 4 of the PFAS. So we kind of knew this was coming, but this is an update since we last met. So they are not going to defend 4 of the 6, but they are going to continue to defend the challenges for what they say are the 2 most prevalent PFAS, which is PFOA and PFOS. So that's just important for our group to know. And just see, I have some notes on that. I did reach out to Brandon Kernan because he did give us a more robust update back in June. And I asked him, you know, with this latest announcement, what does this mean? And he just said, I have looked at all of New Hampshire's public water system data and the hazard index that included PFNA, PFHXS, GenX, and PFBS, which are the 4 PFAS EPA is not going to defend, was only exceeded a couple times only because of PFNA and PFHXS, but in each instance already exceeded 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. So treatment would have been required anyways. The same is true for PFAS results in other New England states. GenX, which is a short chain PFAS that they won't be defending, is simply not found in the US except for a couple manufacturing plants. And he says, it makes me wonder if the correct compound is being looked for. And PFBS is only found at very low levels relative to the denominator in the hazardous index equation. So essentially, not much has changed. And it sounds like even with this EPA impact, we won't see substantial impacts to New Hampshire, especially if PFOA and PFOS go through. Those will be the main drivers for treatment. So just wanted to provide that update. And then another EPA announcement that came out shortly after this one was that EPA will defend designating PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substance under Superfund law. So essentially that allows the circle process to take place in some communities, and it allows for an investigation and cleanup, and it essentially holds the polluters accountable. So for communities experiencing PFAS contamination, that is a good thing. So we're glad to see that, not see EPA continue to support that designation. At PEAS, we are currently undergoing this process and have since the circle process has been in place for a long time, but the PFAS triggered CERCLA process, and we're currently undergoing that. So this will help other communities across the nation be able to access that pathway. And then just a couple other updates for the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the annual military bill. There's a couple amendments that were put in this year that I think are important to note. One is section 318, which would repeal the procurement of DoD of certain items containing PFOA and PFOS. So essentially, there was previous legislation that would require DoD to not purchase products that had PFOA and PFOS in them, and this amendment would take that away. And then there also was another amendment that would repeal the moratorium on incineration of PFAS and AFFF, which is the firefighting foam used at Pease and at many other sites across the country. And so there was a moratorium in place saying DoD could not incinerate or burn up AFFF to get rid of it. And now this would repeal that. So that's, from a community perspective and from a community that's been exposed to AFFF, and, that's concerning to us. What I will say is that Senator Shaheen filed 2 amendments to strike the actions of both of these amendments, but unfortunately, they were not able to find a Republican co-sponsor. And as of right now, the Senate has not voted on this version. So we're kind of watching this closely, but I just wanted to flag those 2 amendments, and there's some links if you want to look at them more closely, but just something that we're keeping an eye on. So with that, any questions on that?
Andrew, just wanted, the New Hampshire DES also has MCLs for 4 different types of PFAS. Is there anything in the federal changes that would impact New Hampshire law or DES's ability to enforce those MCLs?
I believe that Brandon, when he presented last time, I don't want to
I think we can,
speak.
yeah, those will maintain.
Those will maintain, and so that's good news, at least for PFHXS, because that's one not being defended, and that's one that we see at Pease, and that's one that, if you remember from Laurel's presentation, was highest in the blood of the Pease population. So so the New Hampshire law would still remain in effect even if EPA doesn't defend those, which they're not gonna. So
Genex is the contaminant in Merrimack, right?
I'm not sure. I know it's very prevalent in North Carolina,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if Genex is the one that's being found in Merrimack. It could be, but I'm not sure, so I don't want to say for sure. Okay. Move on. Okay, so
Move this down a little bit. There's another slide with just the revised mission after this one, so we can just talk through this.
okay, sounds good. So we've been talking about revising our mission for several meetings now and have taken the time to get feedback and discuss why we're doing this. And just briefly, we established our mission 5 years ago. And it was, pretty narrow and narrowly focused. And over 5 years, our group has grown to cover many different topics, not specifically just PFAS. As we see tonight with our robust agenda with lead and cyanobacteria and several other things. So we want our mission to be more reflective of the work that we actually do in this group. And so this was the progression of how our current mission revised into one that we're recommending that to the city council at the end of the year, that we revise our mission to be more reflective of our work. So it'd be great, we talked about this at the last meeting, if we could take a vote tonight to use the revised mission, and that we would make a recommendation to the city council at the end of this term that the SWAG be renewed, and that with a revised mission to just be more consistent with the work that we're already doing. So I think we've seen consensus from the group on this, and so I would love to take like a motion, right, to do a vote. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll make a motion to revise our mission as stated above.
Second.
okay, great. So is everybody in favor of recommending to the city council at the end of this term that should the SWAG be renewed next term, we would use this revised mission, excuse me.
Yes.
Yes.
Is anyone against that? Okay, we have no no's, so we all agree, and that is great. We will make that recommendation to the city council, and that brings me to our last agenda topic. So our Safe Water Advisory Group is in place by the city council and it has to be I don't know what the right word is, re-upped every time there's a new council in office. And so typically what we have done at the end of each term, 2-year term, we have drafted an end of year report that we send over to the city council. And it essentially summarizes how many meetings we've had, the topics that we've discussed, regulation changes. And it also talks about any recommendations that we as a SWAG have. So far we have sent 2 different reports to the city council throughout our 5-year time together. And so it would be our plan to send a summary for the last 2 years later this year to the city council. And so I just wanted to get this on your radar so you can all start thinking if you have any specific recommendations or anything you want to include. Al and I will draft the document and you will get to read it ahead of time. That's what we've done in the past. We'll write the draft, we'll send it out to you for feedback. But certainly if you have any recommendations, that would be really important for you to let us know so we can make sure those are included. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. I included just in the next 2 slides, in the interest of time, we don't have to go through them all, but they are in documents that are on the SWAG website. Both the 2021 and the 2024 document includes this information, so you could read it in more depth. But essentially, we're just looking for recommendations from this group about what we want to see in the next SWAG, should it be continued by the next council. You know, we want to see them continue the SWAG first and foremost, but also, you know, revise our mission and, you know, continue some of these other things that we've been doing, like monitoring legislation, monitoring treatment for PFAS. You can go to the next slide. And so, yeah, like lead remediation at the Portsmouth school departments, those are things that we've talked about. So yeah, I don't want to sit here and read every single one. I think you guys get the gist, but Al and I would welcome any feedback you have on recommendations for the city council for the end of the year and look for a draft from us later this year to review and share comments on.
So we'll have that in December meeting, we'll have the draft report.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is something you have the information to deal with, but one of the things that would be, I think would be useful would be the level of exposure because of changes in state and federal funding levels in terms of how it may impact projects, things of that nature. There may be some things that we're gonna have to deal with, but we didn't think we were gonna have to deal with it.
Okay.
But that's a big one,
Okay.
because I know this city doesn't run on a huge surplus.
Yeah. Any other like initial reactions or thoughts of things you'd want us to include while we're drafting this report?
Well, I would just say, you know, the last city council meeting is the 22nd of December.
Okay.
You probably want to get it before that because
Yeah.
Not very
Well,
important.
no, yeah.
Yeah, but then the report to council will be the new council, correct? Because that's who
To
will
approve
be
it, yeah.
requesting for
Like-
the continuation.
so I-
of the
okay.
I recall the first time we did this, Brian and I actually went to the council and it was late December and we gave a presentation and then handed in a report. In 2023, we didn't give a presentation, we just sent in the report. So, and I remember we sent it in January. So but I defer to you two as to when we should get it in by. So you think it should go,
Well, if you want to get it in, or if you want to get it done, I think now's the, you know.
yeah, yeah. I
um,
think in terms of renewing the SWAG, it will be the next council, correct? That will do that, okay.
One on your third bullet, stay engaged in the Millionaire Project. My understanding is the Millionaire Project is dead. What's not dead is the idea of a second fixed-based operator over
Right.
there.
Yep.
So that's the thing we need to.
Sure, so in our recommendations, take out Millionaire and just revise fixed space, yep, so that's great. Yeah, I think some of these apply and some maybe don't or need to be modified, so.
Might be P's, actually.
Great. So yeah, just if you think of anything, let Al and I know and we'll share the draft with you. We'll be in touch about meeting again in December for our final meeting of this year. And if there's no other questions. Just have to see if there's public comment. There's nobody here and I don't think we have anybody on Zoom from the public. We have Laurel, who's a SWAG member, and Stephanie. Okay, all right. I think that will conclude our SWAG meeting for tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that presented. Laurel, thank you very much.
Great,
covered-
well,
We covered a lot of ground tonight, so I appreciate you all staying engaged and taking it all in. I'm grateful for all of your participation and interest in these topics. So thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
It's at the top of the hill there on the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you don't have too much.